Hi everyone, I'm Ryan. I'm 29 and I'm a PhD candidate at Penn State University. I'm also an esports professional. I've had about 9 years or so, closer to 10 years in the industry, and I've fulfilled a number of different roles, ranging from being a professional player, much like Black, to being a developer, publisher, and most recently, and perhaps most relevantly, I'm the director of an esports organization in Singapore. What we do is we train and manage professional players and ensure that they get the right amount of publicity, the right type of publicity to be able to advance their careers beyond the borders of Singapore. And that's been a very fulfilling experience for me. So, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be answering the same questions that you guys, the same general questions that you guys have asked the previous interviewees, yeah, uh, and hope that my experience that is sort of in between the worlds of research and the industrial world. I'm hoping that my perspective will provide you something new and something interesting. So yeah, I'm just gonna get started. So initially, every interview we've had so far has introduced their work. Uh, so, research wise, I'm interested in media effects. I'm interested in the way that specific game mechanics influence players and the way that specific mechanics become identified by players as the most fun to engage with, or the most entertaining, or perhaps the most frustrating. So, that to me is what's very interesting, and it's what's currently driving my research focuses. Uh, on the industry side, I started playing games late in life. My family was initially very against me playing games because they felt that it would be something that I could get addicted to, and perhaps they were right. I don't think so. I hope not. Uh, but yeah, I started playing games when I was 16, and maybe to overcompensate for the fact that I started so late, I played a lot. And so one of the things that I ended up doing was becoming good enough at games to start playing professionally. So that's what I did. And from there, I got I got good enough to be a salaried player, but I didn't get good enough to stay that way for very long. So I ended up becoming a coach. Uh, and from there, I moved on to becoming a manager and manage professional teams. And management generally involves just babysitting for the most part. It's not a very illustrious job, but it is one that is very fulfilling in that if you manage your players right, you can make a good manager makes or breaks a team, a professional team. Same goes for coach. Uh, and yeah, from there I went on to doing becoming a game publisher. I worked in a publishing company for about 3 years, uh, and one of the things I did there was to determine what games we'd acquire and what games we'd get funding for, and what games that we'd ultimately publish on our platform. Uh, and then from there, I moved on into doing some games development. I did a lot of game testing as part of the job, and also because uh, I started getting invitations to participate in a lot of pre-alpha tests, so the very early builds of games, uh, and I get called in to sit and look at the games, play through what they had, and talk about like changes to the mechanical systems that they had and changes to the mechanical interactions that they wanted to implement, and essentially that became my specialty, which eventually fueled my research interest. Uh, so yeah, I think I talked about both uh, the industry side and the research side. I'm actually not too sure. I don't know if I'll edit this part out, but this isn't the first take, so I don't remember what I've already talked about. I hope this is right, but moving on. Uh, so what's one thing I like and one thing I dislike about this work? Well, I would say that the thing that I like the most is being able to see and identify the ways that games influence people positively. So we've talked a lot about the negative side this semester, but something that's often very underrepresented both in academia and in society is about the positive effects of video games. And the whole reason why games are being used to persuade in like serious games, for example, or to teach in edutainment games is because games are very powerful platforms. And as a result, they're also very good platforms for stories. In fact, in my opinion, games were developed perhaps intuitively as a result of society and mankind's needs to tell different types of stories. Like the storytelling tradition has evolved a lot from like its origins as like fireside stories where we just talk to each other around a campfire, and then we had books and we had paintings, and we've just gone very far from all of that all the way through television and film, and now we're at video games. And the same effects that we see from a very good story are the same can be observed in video game experiences. So that's something that to me is both very interesting and very gratifying about the work that I do, being able to see and being able to hopefully contribute to the development of games that can positively influence people in that way. At the same time, what I dislike the most about it is that that's a lot of work, and as a result, you don't really have as much time to play games. So finding a balance between the two has been hard, especially this semester, but I don't know. Hopefully I'll get there. So, do I personally play video games? Yes, I do. A lot of them. And I play them a lot. So, I think I I've calculated this before, and I think I have around 13 to 15,000 hours of games played collectively, and I've played a couple of hundred different types of games, or a couple of hundred different titles of games. Yeah. So yes, I do personally play video games. Um, the next question that I'm gonna answer would be favorite game of all time, and that's one that is is really difficult to answer with just one. I've got a lot of favorite games, especially across different genres. Like if we were talking about purely FPS games, I would say Halo, because that what Halo does is that it perfectly merges single player and multiplayer experiences. It's you don't really have many games apart from some of the AAA titles that give you both a really satisfying campaign as well as a very entertaining multiplayer game mode. And so I thought Halo did that really well, and it continued to do well even across all its different titles in the series. So Halo 1 was great, 2, 3, 4. I haven't finished 4, and I haven't played 5, but I've heard good things about them, and I'm hoping to get some time to do that in winter. Uh, we'll see how that goes. So yeah, favorite game of all time, maybe Halo for FPS, StarCraft for RTS. Favorite MOBA, I would guess Dota 2, Dota 1 back in its day, and Dota 2 now. Favorite arena-based shooter would be Overwatch. Favorite battle royale would I'm gonna say Spellbreak. It's not out yet; it's still in development, but I really enjoy the way it's going. Uh, and yeah, so I guess that about covers it for favorite games. So the worst experience I've had with a video game. Okay, so to talk about worst experiences in video games, I first have to talk about the types of experiences that you could even have. So every video game experience encompasses three different dimensions. You have your physical experience, the physical world of inter- interfacing with the game. You have your mouse, and you have your keyboard, and you have your screen, and all these things are part of the physical world that you experience while you're playing a game. And then you have your game world, the virtual world in which everything about the game is taking place. And then you also have the social world, which is something that is interesting and also very hard to pin down. The social experience is essentially, it revolves around the idea that you don't play games by yourself ever. Even if it's a single player game, your experience can still be shared with others, either as a topic of conversation, if you're talking to your friends about a game that you've played, like maybe Red Dead Redemption, yeah, or if you talk about a forum, you talk on a forum about a game, uh, like if you participate in a discussion about horse testicles in Red Dead Redemption 2, and if you talked about it on a forum, or you replied to a YouTube post about it, or you posted a YouTube video about it, all of these things build up the social world that surrounds a video game. So, to me, the worst experiences arise when there's a disconnection between these different worlds, these different experiences. Uh, Most specifically, the interface between physical world and game world. So, to me, the worst experiences aren't in specific video games. It has to do entirely with stuff like latency or like lag or controller input issues. Essentially, the worst experiences that I can have in a game is when my physical world, my physical experience is failing to do what it should in the game world. When my keyboard starts malfunctioning, when I'm experiencing lag, the disconnection between game and physical world frustrates me to no end. So that's where the worst experiences come about, in my opinion. Uh, I'm hoping to not let this video end up too long, because I know a lot of you might not actually be watching all of them. So, does your professional work related to video games in some way interfere with your ability to enjoy games recreationally? Yes, as I mentioned earlier, I think. Because of the amount of work that goes into games research and also goes into managing an esports organization, I tend not to just not have as much time to play games, and essentially that's the only way that it's interfered with my ability to enjoy games. Uh, I know with Dominic, he talks about how being so invested and needing to train so hard in a particular game detracts from the enjoyment of playing that game. And I did experience that in the past. I've burnt out on games that I've had to train specifically for. So I can see where he's coming from with regards to that. At the same time, I would say that the more frustrating way that being involved in the game industry has influenced my recreational gaming has been primarily through just having less time to play. I would rather be still spending 8 hours a day training than to not have any time to play. Yeah. So, what are the major differences in professional gaming and gaming for entertainment? I thought this was one that would be useful to answer, because when you're looking at it from a coach perspective and from an organizational esports organizational perspective, it's very different from how players look at it. Uh, the major difference between professional gaming and gaming for entertainment is what you perceive goals in game to be. So, when you're gaming for entertainment, your ultimate goals aren't within the game itself. Your ultimate goals are stuff like you want to have fun, or you need to kill some time, or you want to talk to your friends. There are a whole bunch of goals and objectives that you have that are outside the world of the game, and that's what makes gaming fun. That's what makes gaming entertaining. When you're talking about professional gaming, that has to change. You've got to, once a game starts, you need to push everything outside the world of gaming away and just focus on individual objectives within the game. So to me, that's the biggest difference between professional and casual gaming. Another major difference would be your conduct. So when you're gaming for entertainment, your social conduct really doesn't matter that much. Being an ass online is never a good thing, but your toxicity influences those around you. That's your fear. That's your sphere of influence. People you play with. When you're a professional gamer, your sphere of influence is anyone who's watching you. So, any kind of misconduct or just any kind of toxicity that you exhibit when you're playing a game has implications on not just the people that you're playing with, but also on the community at large. And that's something that every professional gamer needs to be very aware of. So, yeah, those two are the major differences, in my opinion. Moving on to the next question. What would you say is the most important way that games have affected society? Well, I think I think this goes back to what I was talking about with regards to storytelling traditions. I think that the most important contributions that games have made to society is through the platform of a new, through the provision of a new storytelling platform. I think we've, so far to this date, stories have always been something that are not interactive. When you're, let's say, you're an ancient shaman telling the story of the history of your people to the kids by the fireside, you don't let them interrupt, and anything that anyone around the fire says doesn't change your story. It doesn't change the way the story needs to progress. And if you move to stuff like books, that that becomes the case. That becomes even more firmly the case because people aren't allowed to rewrite the book while they are reading it. You certainly could if you really wanted to, but it wouldn't be the same book. And then when you move on to film and television, it's exactly the same thing. When you the most control that you have over the game, the most interactivity is not game. The most interactivity over the film or the television show that you have would be through something like Netflix or having a physical copy of it that you could rewind and pause and fast forward through. And that's not really interactivity, that's activity. It's one way, it's you messing around with the flow of the story. Now, when we come to games, that's something entirely different. You now are given the ability to have your choices make an actual impact on the world of the game and on the story of the game. And to me, that's a very important contribution because it's reflective of how we've perhaps evolved as a species. We're no longer talking about just passing on information and passing on our histories so that people can survive. We're now passing on information so that people can participate in how societies change. And I think games are the beginning of that. I don't really know where it's going to go from there, but the in, I think that by providing a platform through which people can participate in a way that stories about things about life are told, by being able to do that, games are essentially giving us a new perspective on the world around us and on the way that individuals can influence that. So that's what I think. Uh, what challenge facing the game industry do you think is the most important to solve? This is a question that I was not looking forward to because most important to solve is really hard to determine in the games industry. There are a lot of things wrong with it. Um, as I think Maria has talked about, sexism has been a big issue, and as Black has talked about, racism too. Discrimination in general is one of the big things that's keeping uh, the game industry from progressing as fast as it should be, because it has technology and it has society on its side, but and it has funding on its side, that's for sure. But we're often held back by not allowing certain people to flourish where they should. And I don't, I don't know. I could go more into that, but that's probably not the purview of my interview here. So I think maybe something that is more easily identifiable and more relatable to is the is the issue of toxicity in games. I think for any one of you here that has ever played a game that involves other players, toxic communities and toxic players and toxic interactions are one of the biggest reasons for people to stop wanting to play a game. Uh, and the challenge is to be able to come up with a system that prevents that. There are lots of games that have tried to do that. I mean, I think we've seen it. A, a really good example of a game developer that has tried to combat toxicity would be Blizzard in Hearthstone. So for most of you that, for those of you that don't know about Hearthstone, it's essentially a virtual card game, and what Blizzard has done is that it's limited the number of ways that you can interact with your opponent in terms of ways that you can communicate with your opponent. You've just got preset things that your character can say. Uh, but even then, even with a system that limits communication that way, you still have people who there are still players who find ways to be toxic in those games, such as like spamming this particular um, chat phrase during after a turn or during your opponent's turn. Essentially, toxicity is something that there's only there's two ways to combat toxicity. One is to change human nature, just getting people to ass not be assholes online. And the other way is to develop systems that punishes them for being toxic online. And developing those systems is probably one of the greatest challenges. So yeah, that's probably a more satisfying answer than what I previously gave. Yeah, so moving on to the next one. Ah, what trends in the game industry do you anticipate, and how do you think your work would change because of it, if at all? I think the biggest trend is the movement of games away from conventional platforms like the PC or a console to mobile gaming. And I'm personally not a big fan of mobile gaming. I don't really have a good reason why. It might really just be because I'm not used to it. But this shift to mobile gaming means that we now have, as a from esports perspective, we now need to be able to adapt to new ways of playing that previously weren't important. Let's take what's a good mobile game? Uh, so Mobile Legends is a fairly popular MOBA played on a mobile platform, and I think one of the things that my organization generally has not trained anyone to participate in mobile competitions in mobile esports, but from what I've heard from some of my friends who are managing teams that are into mobile esports is that it's kind of hard to get people to be fully immersed in a mobile game. It's or there there needs to be a balance in any esports tournament, in any esports training. There needs to be a balance between a player's immersion in the game and their disconnect disconnection from the game, because you need to be engaged enough that you're alert to anything that happens, so that you can react to anything that happens in game. But at the same time, you need to be distant enough that you are still aware of exactly what objectives you're going for and exactly what your teammates are doing. And one of the things that happens in mobile games is tunnel vision, and it seems to happen a lot more than in conventional platforms. And I'm actually not too sure why. That would make for an interesting research question. But yeah, uh, so yeah, mobile gaming is something that is going to change the industry. It's in a direction that I don't particularly like, but it seems inevitable at this point. Uh, yeah. So what do I think distinguishes a successful game from an unsuccessful one? So that depends on what you think success is for a game. Uh, so if you're talking about economic success, a successful game is one that uh, just generates a big profit. That's it. That's what makes an economically successful game. However, if you're talking about what makes a game an entertainment success, what makes a game successful at entertaining people, and how do you determine if a game is successful at that, it's longevity. So, economic success is how much you can get players to spend on your game. Entertainment success is about how long you can get your players to continue playing the game. They're very often intertwined, because the longer they play, if you've got microtransactions, then the longer they play, the more they spend. But I think it's important to look at it from these two different dimensions. Uh, any successful game is, at least from a publisher's perspective, yeah, from a publisher's or an esports professional's perspective, a successful game is one that is very popularly played. So it's got to have either a lot of players, a lot of consecutive online players, consecutive online users, or it's got to have a lot of subscribers, or it's just got to have a large player base. That's what makes a economically successful game. And at the same time, you also have to look at whether these players who initially bought or subscribed or are part of the player base, you need to check if they are staying that way. If the player base is sustainable, if it stays at the size that it originally started out with, or if it stays at a large size, then that's something that indicates that the game is continuing to entertain people. And yeah, so success is based on these two dimensions. There's probably more, but these are the two that I think are the most important in determining what distinguishes a successful game from an unsuccessful one. If it has a large player base and the player base is maintained over a long period of time, that's a clear way of saying it. So, the last question that I'll be answering is, what advice would you give to a soon-to-be college graduate who might be interested in doing work that is connected with the game industry? So you guys have I think Maria has given excellent advice in this direction, but I'm going to add on to that. Uh, it's not just about knowing exactly what you want and not selling yourself short. It's also about being able to fulfill multiple different roles. I know this kind of seems like I'm just giving my personal experience as uh, advice. Uh, but to be fair, I think that really is one of the best ways that you can go about approaching uh, an occupation or a job in the game industry. we're still at the point of time where there aren't very the barriers between roles are not very well set. So this doesn't include stuff like uh, visual design and programming. For those, you just need to focus on that and just that. But from the perspective of a communications graduate, from the perspective of someone who's graduating with a degree not specific to the technical expertise required to create a game, it's very important that you develop skill sets and understandings that would make you valuable in different roles. So, um, one way of looking at it is that you want to be able to work not just as a game developer, you also want to be able to understand a bit about how the development of the game is going to influence its player base. So you also want to be able to do some of the community side of things, some of the PR and advertising side of things, and you'd also want to be able to have at least a basic understanding of content creation. So if let's say you're interested in being a game narrative designer, a game writer, uh, what would be valuable is that you don't just focus on writing game narratives. You also be at least decently well versed in writing game reviews, and perhaps stuff like being able to provide um, PR releases for publishers, and being able to provide not just content narrative but also marketing narrative. So stuff like that, being able to apply your skill set to multiple roles, or being able to develop multiple skill sets that will fit multiple roles, is something that's very valuable in the industry right now. I don't know whether that will continue to be the case in the long run, but for now, that's a good way of at least entering the industry. If you have some experience in um, blogging or vlogging or any sort of content creation, and that's something that has to go into your CV, because all of these things are essentially what will set you apart from a graduate that has only focused in one technical aspect. So yeah, I hope that helps. And if you've got any additional questions, you can always email me. My email's in the syllabus. Yeah. Thank you.